Should South Africa's school leavers matric exam pass mark be raised from 30% for some subjects to 50% for all subjects? Because we're doing the debate again. Every single year when the matric exams come out, some prominent voices in South African life say that it is completely unacceptable, whereas others say actually because of the systemic inequality and the failures of the education system, it needs to be 30% for some subjects to give students a chance. That is the debate that happens every single year. And so we're going to do it again now. Musi Maimane is the loudest voice, triggering what has been another massive round of debate about whether or not we should just put the pass mark back at 50% where it used to be for matric school leavers. So this is the issue with the matric pass mark. You're watching The Issue with Dan Corder. South Africa is a movie. Welcome to the watch party. Welcome back to The Issue with Dan Corder for 2025. It is wonderful to see you. We also started doing our weekday morning podcast, Dan Corder in the Morning, again this week. You can get that 20 to 25 minute daily news worth knowing update on any podcast streamer that you prefer to use. And the TV show that we have on ENCA, The Dan Corder Show, also returned. But we had Moonchild Sanelli and Poppy Sabir, the iconic backpacking, boundary-breaking revolutionary in our travel entertainment industry. So those are all of our various shows. Catch you there. Never thought I would own a car. I really never thought I would ever own one of my dream cars. I only got my driver's license at like 27 years old. And I did that with the wonderful folks at Suzuki in a Suzuki Espresso. And now a handful of years later, it was completely thrilling and wonderful to purchase my first car, a Suzuki Jimny 5-door, the brand new one with the extra space in the back for passengers. And the first thing I did was do one of my favorite things, which is to go on a road trip. I do the drive from Johannesburg down to Cape Town every December after the end of a long work year. I did it with my brother and his cat. On this road trip, we went on all kinds of terrains, through all kinds of weather, right through Gauteng, Free State, Northern Cape, and then Western Cape over 2 days. We stayed in Victoria West. And I got the car 2 days before we left, and it was an absolute dream. So thank you to the good people at Suzuki for putting that together for me. Truly, what an epic piece of machinery. So what's the current situation with the pass mark for matric in South Africa's education system? Because it does sound weird that you only need to get 30% for certain subjects to get a matric school leavers pass. Well, the reason is a handful of years ago, the Department of Basic Education decided that for certain subjects going to matric, you only need to get 30% to pass. This was in recognition of the challenges that our schooling system faces, particularly in the teaching of some very vital subjects, and the recognition that some school kids who can only get in the 30s in certain key subjects, that they have learned something, that they are able to answer 3 out of 10 questions right or 4 out of 10 questions right. And that doesn't sound great, but they are able to do that, and they should be able to pass with that kind of capacity reflected, that kind of capability in those key subjects reflected in their pass, rather than to just fail. And before we get on to the criticisms of this policy, we need to understand how vitally important, how potentially life-changing having a matric pass at all is. In South Africa, where youth unemployment is anywhere between 60 and 70%, highest in the world, where general mass unemployment is so high. I've spoken to a lot of organizations, NGOs, and research units which investigate and try to understand why unemployment in this country is so bad and to understand how hard it is to get a job. And what they describe is when some kind of job listing is put out into the world by any kind of company, they get hundreds to thousands, sometimes even tens of thousands of applications. The initial first thing that potential employers do is they see, do you have a matric certificate at all? That is the base level for potential employability. And if you don't have a matric pass, you're almost instantly, in the vast majority of instances, ruled out of consideration for that job. A matric certificate is that absolutely non-negotiable, vital first step to be able to try and find work. That's how important the matric certificate is. Okay, now let's talk about the criticisms of 30% to pass. And this is where people like Musi Maimane this year have said, we need to strive for excellence. We need to make sure that matric certificate has some kind of value, that it signals some kind of capacity, capability, learning, and performance from the students who come out of school with that matric certificate. And they say that if you've got certain subjects where you only need to get 30% to pass, it devalues the matric certificate and leaves us with learners who have left school who just don't have the capacity, the learning, the capability, the performance evidence to be able to be useful and competitive in our job market. And then the second thing that people who have this position say is that when you allow for a passing grade to be just 30% in certain subjects, that lets the education system off the hook. The teachers and the schools who are incentivized to work to get as many of their kids to pass as possible, if they only need their kids to get 30% in certain subjects, well, then they don't have to work as hard. And that lack of incentive for them to strive and work harder causes poorer education outcomes. And so these people argue that we need to raise the pass mark as an incentive to push the education department and the educators to do better. The other side is that in reality, our education system, our Department of Basic Education, is failing. That is absolutely true. There are so many schools still in South Africa that have pit toilets, which are so dangerous and so inhumane and so unhygienic. There are so many schools in South Africa that don't have teachers, don't have enough teachers, don't have school rooms that are made out of brick and mortar. There are so many schools in South Africa that are unsafe, that are literally insecure physically. They are dangerous to get to. There are so many schools in South Africa that don't have sufficient resources of textbooks and all of these things that you need to have to provide a competitive and useful education for kids. And there are so many teachers who are underpaid and so many schools that are understaffed, which means the teachers are working too hard, getting burnt out, and not even incentivized through decent pay, not even able to have a decent quality of life from the pay that they get from the hard work that they do to provide and teach. In that context, with schools failing, it is completely unfair to then expect school kids to perform at their highest level, because they are literally not in, if you're going to think about it like a sports analogy, they're not in the training facilities that they need. They don't have the nutrition, the sports nutrition that they need, the basic food. They don't have the basic education. And so to punish kids essentially for being born into a society where they are forced to go to schools that do not equip them well enough to get 50% on all subjects in Matric is completely wrong, and then denies them of that Matric pass and denies them the ability to say, oh no, but I can do 30% in this subject. I was able to do that. I was able to overcome that. And then there's a second layer of this beyond the education system. Many kids are born into extreme poverty in South Africa. Many kids are born into socioeconomic circumstances with one parent at home, or no books in the house. And books in the home is a key indicator of the degree to which somebody can gain numeracy and literacy. Many kids are born into circumstances where they might have pressure to drop out of school or at least work a job and try to make money alongside going at school. Many kids have to care for their other siblings in a home because their parents are absent seeking work or whatever. And again, it's not these kids' fault that this is happening, that there are all these pressures. Frankly, for many kids, it's a miracle that they managed to get to Matric at all and not drop out, considering all of the other pressures and obstacles facing them and weighing them down. And so the people who argue against the 50% for all subject people say, to raise the pass mark to 50% for all subjects, all you're doing is punishing those kids for all of these circumstances that they were born into. And yes, every year there are a handful of miracle cases from poorly resourced schools, from extremely disadvantaged backgrounds who found a way. But the fact that they are miracle cases doesn't mean that everybody else should be performing to that level. The fact that they are miracle cases indicates that they managed to overcome through some miraculous endeavor, some freak of nature, some freak of circumstance they were able to overcome. And we should not expect the vast majority of school-going kids from dire circumstances to have to do that, because that's just not a reasonable thing. The system is a problem. And so, where does this debate leave us? The 50% pass for all subjects people say, but the only way we're going to change that, this circumstance of a poor, at least education system, is to make it harder so the Matric certificate has more value, and so teachers have to work harder, kids have to work harder. In response to that, a lot of people say, well, that didn't work before, and teachers just working harder, that's not the problem here. They need to be better resourced, better equipped, better paid, better supported, and the schools need to be better developed. Like this kind of incentive is not going to cause a change of teaching quality. And in the short term, even if it did cause a change in teaching quality for the better, you would lose all of the millions of kids who are currently in the system not being taught well enough and not coming from blessed enough socioeconomic circumstances to be able to perform well. You're disadvantaging all of them and screwing them and removing their chance of getting a Matric certificate pass that is crucial for them to then be able to get further study or to get a decent paying job at all. So there have to be other reforms and other incentives to create accountability that affects the Department of Basic Education and affects the people who are supposed to be equipping and resourcing the schools, and affects all of the other ministries in South Africa that are supposed to be causing wide-scale societal change and revolution, such that kids have better socioeconomic circumstances to grow up in, such that they can go to school and can perform well. We shouldn't create an incentive structure that punishes the kids. And one more important thing to remember in this debate that I learned from an interview I did with a very respected lifelong educator. She was saying to me that when a child is forced to drop out of school, or when a child fails Matric, they experience such a sense of shame, humiliation, an assault on their dignity and value as people, and such a sense of rejection from society. We need to remember that these are kids who are trying their best in awful circumstances. And if they can't overcome them, it's not their fault. But when they are forced to drop out or they fail, that they suffer horrific emotional consequences and psychic damage. So when we have this debate, and they have it every year, and we try to be callous and hard and rough about, oh no, the kids must just do better and the teachers must just do better, and if they fail, well, then they failed. It's not like that. When kids fail, the damage is extraordinary. And we should remember and have empathy and humanity when talking about these kinds of debates for what we're really talking about. So that's the issue with the Matric pass mark debate. See you on the podcast, see you on TV, see you on YouTube.